The pursuit of justice has been a theme in my life for many years. And in recent years, I've had the opportunity to visit many parts of the world as the result of work that I was doing with International Justice Mission Canada. But I really cut my teeth on international development work in El Salvador, in Central America, starting about 15 years ago. And I wanted to share a couple of stories about my experience there. Um, and they're two sort of interwoven stories that have been really informing for me in terms of my own commitment to the work of justice. The first story is from an occasion about 15 years ago when I was in El Salvador with a group of young adults from Canada. And I was working with an organization that works in partnership with the church in Central America. And I was asked by the bishop if I would take this group of young adults to a prison in the city of San Miguel in El Salvador. And he asked me if I would lead worship for this the prisoners in the prison. And I said to him, "Do you want me to do this in English? Because I don't really speak very much Spanish." And he said, "Well, when are you going? And it would be better if you did it in Spanish." And I said, "Well, I'm going in another day or so." And he said, "I think you have time to learn between now and then." And so in the next day and a half, with the help of a tutor, I did what I could to be able to lead a service of worship. And afterwards, looked back and thought, I never in my life thought that I would be in a position when I would be leading worship in a prison in Central America. Now that's the first part of the first story, because the next year or so I went back to El Salvador again. And by then I had immersed myself in Spanish language studies, because I realized if I was going to be able to interact effectively, especially with rural people in El Salvador, I needed to be able to speak at least some rudimentary Spanish. And while I was there, I sat down with an elderly man who had been involved in the civil war in El Salvador and repatriated to a new area. And his granddaughter, Rosita, lived with him. And while I was there, a photographer who was accompanying me was just snapping some pictures, and he took one particularly beautiful picture of Rosita and later presented it to me as a gift, which hangs on the wall in my office. And on subsequent trips to El Salvador, when I would be in her village, I would ask, "Where is Rosita? How is Rosita? What's going on with Rosita now?" And that happened visit after visit until she was about 15 years old. When I had first met her, she was about 7. And on that last occasion, I asked, "How is Rosita? Where is she? I haven't seen her around." And the response that I got was, "Oh, I'm really sorry. Rosita was trafficked into a gang about a year ago, and nobody's seen her and nobody knows where she is." And so I have this image hanging on the wall in my office that's really kind of an icon for me, that although organizations like Wellspring or many other organizations respond to the needs of many thousands of people, it begins with the one. And for me, it's that one, Rosita. So the way that this kind of ties in with the other part of this story is that when I was at the prison in San Miguel, there was a female prisoner who was there, and she had lines tattooed onto the sides of her mouth. And those lines were like the crack that you'd find on the mouth of a ventriloquist's dummy. And she had been convicted of a crime in connection with a gang. And those lines on the sides of her mouth indicated that she didn't have a voice of her own. She was only to be the prop for the gang member who was the one who controlled her. And that was what had led to her imprisonment. So as I look back on my interactions with the prisoners in San Miguel, and that one woman in particular, and when I think about Rosita and how she was deprived her own voice by having been trafficked into a gang, it made me realize how important it is for organizations like Wellspring to come alongside those who are deprived of their voice, equip them with the tools that they need through education, in order that they're able to express themselves meaningfully. And not only for their own defense and for their own protection, but also so that they can contribute meaningfully to the society around them and consequently make life better for more.